Hey folks, so we're back for a solo episode. First of all, welcome back. Great to see you here. For today's episode, I decided that what I would do, what might be helpful is I recently posted a reel on Instagram, and it was 5 things that I wish people knew in their 40s that would improve their health and longevity outcomes that don't need to cost money. And got really good response to that reel, got a bunch of questions from people. And so, the tricky thing about social media, as you all know, is that it's very limited in terms of how much we can say, how much can we qualify these statements. And we do our best to make statements that are completely true, but what they are is lacking in nuance. And as much as there are basic fundamental truths that pretty much apply to everybody, there's going to be exceptions to every rule, and there's going to be qualifiers, right? There's going to be times when, as a matter of fact, one of the big ones that I listed here was nasal breathing. So encouraging people to breathe through their nose versus breathing through their mouths. And one of my girlfriends called me up very concerned. She totally gets it. And at the same time, she's like, but what if you can't breathe through your nose? I mean, this sounds like you're telling people to tape their mouth shut, but what if they can't breathe? And, you might say, well, obviously then you wouldn't tape your mouth shut. But the problem is that the consequences of mouth breathing don't change. So I decided to do this solo episode on those 5 factors that I listed in that reel and give you guys a little bit more background and a little more context to each one of the things. So here we go. I'm going to do my best to try and keep this to about a half-hour episode. It might go a little bit longer. We'll see. And the other thing I want to say is, even though I said people in their 40s should start this, honestly, for every one of these things, the sooner you start, the better. If you're in your 20s and you happen to be listening to this, or you have someone in your life who's in their 20s, it's never too soon to start good habits, folks. And all of these things need to be addressed as early as possible because it sets you up for success down the road. Okay, here's number 1. Digestive bitters before a meal. What do digestive bitters do? Digestive bitters stimulate saliva. And what this does is it starts the breakdown of your food in the mouth and ultimately sets you up for better digestion. Now, a lot of people will tell you that actually digestion starts even before the food hits your mouth. Digestion, it can even start when you start thinking about food. Like, I want you to close your eyes and imagine something really delicious or something very sour, something that you really enjoy. Is your mouth watering? Yeah, right? So this actually starts the digestive process, which is why thinking about food all the time is not that good for you, because then you're constantly feeling like, oh, I could be eating this. And that's a whole other topic. But the bottom line is digestive bitters taken about 20 minutes before a meal can be super helpful at getting those juices flowing. And if you think about it, in a lot of cultures, they will have built into the way that they eat, starting with something bitter. And for example, in Italy, very often people will start with a small salad. They'll start with arugula or radicchio. Arugula and radicchio are bitter foods, a little bit of olive oil, some lemon juice and salt. And that in and of itself acts like a bitter to kind of start activating the gut. So what it does is, when you're eating the bitters, we get the benefit of activating bitter taste receptors on the tongue. And this ultimately signals the brain to trigger the vagus nerve. It stimulates production of saliva, gastric acid, bile, and even your own digestive enzymes. Now, you know that a lot of people will talk about, as we age, we may need to use digestive enzymes. Sometimes if we get people to take these bitters about 20 minutes before their meal, they don't need the digestive enzymes as much. Some people still end up needing them, but a lot of people maybe can circumvent that. So it's a really good kind of low-hanging fruit, easy intervention to try out to improve your digestion. The other thing that happens is, by increasing stomach acid and gastric juices, this can help to resolve heartburn, indigestion, bloating, which very often are blamed on too much acid, but ironically are very often blamed on not enough acid. And that's why for some people, supplementing with betaine HCl, which is very specific to digesting animal protein, can be very, very helpful in how well they digest their steak, let's say. And they don't have that heavy, heavy feeling happening after the fact. Depends what you have with your steak, of course, but I'm just talking about digesting the meat. Now, the other thing that those bitters does is it promotes bile flow. And this happens in the liver and the gallbladder, and it's crucial for digesting fats. plus supporting detox in the body, because bile is one of those mechanisms of action that your body has for detoxification. And ironically, it can also help with constipation. So promoting bile flow is a big deal. We're still just talking about digestive bitters before meals here. It also helps it can play a role, I don't want to overplay this, but it can definitely play a role in appetite regulation. Because what happens is when you eat those bitters, it stimulates the release of ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone, another hormone called TCK, and guess what? The buzzword of the day, GLP-1. Both of these help to regulate appetite, promote fullness, and they may even help to curb cravings. So in short, it might actually help to reduce overeating. Cool, right? Number 6 is by using those digestive bitters or eating something bitter before your meal, it can improve blood flow to your organs of digestion. Now, your organs of digestion are no different than your muscles. They need proper blood flow to work properly. And again, we're going to support here better digestion and ultimately better nutrient absorption. Now, in nutrition school land, we always like to say that you cannot absorb and assimilate things that you haven't digested properly. So digestion is really key in giving your body access to the nutrients of the foods that you're eating so that you can get the benefit of them. Now, number 7 is that these bitters also can help to relax smooth muscle and soothe your gut. And this is specifically attributed to bitters like ginger and chamomile. And it's funny because, everybody thinks of chamomile as a sleepy tea, but chamomile actually is a digestive bitter herb. And this can ultimately help with cramping and bloating. Number 8, we're on number 8 here, can help to stabilize blood sugar by supporting insulin release and reducing sugar cravings. Now, here's a really cool one, and I did not know this until I started digging into this, that eating digestive bitters may support immune function because guess what? There are bitter receptors throughout the body, including the respiratory tract. And there were actually a couple of studies that showed that specifically in the lungs, that those bitter receptors, when they were stimulated, gave immune benefits. It seems a little far-fetched, but actually it's not. We know that the body is fully integrated. So I thought that was a pretty interesting point. Now, where do you get digestive bitters? So as I said before, you can eat foods, right? Like the bitter greens that you might have in a salad. Ginger is a really interesting one. In Indian food, very often, I remember my Ayurvedic teacher used to talk about having a bolus of ginger. So that's like a chunk of ginger before the meal. Pretty powerful, not going to lie. It could be a little too intense for some people, but these are things that can help get this whole machinery going. Now, if you're not interested in doing that, there are a couple of other options. If you go to a health food store, they will often have digestive bitter tinctures where they've taken the bitters from all of these different foods that people don't necessarily like to eat. All you have to do is go squirt in a little shot of water and shoot that back about 20 minutes before your meal. If you want to go a little higher tech, Quicksilver Scientific has a great digestive bitter formula. I think it's called Digestive Bitters number 9 or something. And then finally, for people who really just can't stand the bitter taste, and I know you're out there because there's actually even a genetic thing to that, Just Thrive Health that make great probiotics also now are making digestive bitters in a capsule. So you're not going to get the benefits of them hitting your taste buds, but you are going to get those systemic benefits once they get into the gut and they get released. And now they're going to affect all your bitter receptors throughout the body. Okay, so that was number 1. Digestive bitters before meals, even if you don't like the taste. Number 2, train your glymphatic system. Now, what does that mean? You have a lymphatic system. That's your whole body system of draining the lymph through the lymph nodes. And we talk about lymphatic drainage as being very beneficial. Now, it wasn't until, I think it was about 20 years ago, a Danish neuroscientist by the name of Nat Niddam discovered that the brain has its very own lymphatic system that we call the glymphatic system. And the glymphatic system is critical to activate, especially at night, because that's when your brain clears all the waste products and toxins from the days. I'm going to mention this in a couple of these other points below, that allowing this glymphatic system to do its job is a key step in brain health, both in the short term and in the long term. So how do you support your glymphatic system? Well, the first one is you want to get enough deep sleep. And we want to prioritize slow wave delta sleep. How do we do that? Well, we're going to do some of the things that I'm talking about below, where we're going to stop eating 2 to 3 hours before bed, but we're also going to make sure that we regulate our nervous system before we go to bed. We avoid screens. We do not watch the news. And we are going to make sure, and this is going to be a tough one for some of you guys, not only are you going to stop eating 2 to 3 hours before bed, but you're going to try to get to bed, if you can, around 10:30 at night. If you wear wearables, and this is the beauty of wearables that track your sleep, you will notice that you get, even if you get the same number of hours of sleep, very often if we go to bed at midnight, we do not get as good deep sleep as we do if we go to bed at 10 or 10:30 or even 11, because there's something about your circadian rhythm, your circadian clock, that kind of preferentially stacks that deep sleep closer to the beginning of your sleep cycle, which happens to be naturally where it's supposed to be, is not that long after sunset. I know. It sucks because ultimately we want to be up doing fun things, but consider this. Your brain will be healthier if you get to bed earlier. And I'm not always that good at that. So I'm an offender. But definitely, I've noticed in my sleep wearable data that when I go to bed before midnight, especially before 11, I get way better deep sleep stats. Another way to support your glymphatic system is exercise, because it promotes cerebrospinal fluid flow through the glymphatic system. So this would be during your waking hours, and both aerobic and resistance training will work. Number 3 is hydration. You need volume of fluid. Look, it sounds a little silly, but the truth of the matter is if you're dehydrated, your whole body's going to suffer. Your digestion is not going to be as good. Your joints are going to kind of not work as well because they're going to lack that fluid within the joint. And similarly, your brain is not going to be able to clear the toxins as well because it's going to be dehydrated. Number 4, eat brain healthy foods. Omega-3 fatty acids in particular support the aquaporin 4 channels. So these are little channels in the cells that are essential for glymphatic clearance. I would also say that nutrients like Body Bio's PC oil, very important for cell membranes, very important for the brain. Okay, number 5, sleep on your side. So this is the one thing that I said in that reel. Sleeping on your side is way better than your stomach or your back to promote better glymphatic drainage in order to remove that metabolic waste from the brain. And we already said, finish eating dinner, finish your food 3 hours before bed to optimize your sleep quality. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later here. So sleeping on your side also happens to be better for digestion. And if your digestion's better, your sleep's better. If your sleep's better, your glymphatic drainage is better. All of these things are tied together. So it's never too soon to adopt these better habits. Okay. Second thing I said in that reel was practice grounding. Okay. This is weird. It's going to sound weird to a lot of you, but to many of you, it may not. This losing connection with nature that we, especially those of us who live in big cities, is really costing us in our health. So the cool thing is this is free and this is easy. You can pay for grounding, and I'll explain that in a little while, but this is truly rooted in science. And I've included a link to a study in the show notes so that those of you who don't believe me and think I'm just talking out of the air here can go in there and see that there's been scientific studies done that show that this actually is incredibly powerful. So scientists discovered a long, long time ago that the earth resonates at roughly 7.83 times per second. These are called the Schumann resonances, and it's maintained by a global electrical circuit. It's produced by like lightning strikes and all kinds of different factors. And so what happens is you get negative ions, you get positive ions, and you get this wealth of free electrons on the surface of the ground. And so when we stand on the ground in bare feet, we're able to absorb these incredible free electrons, and they result in incredibly positive physiological changes, such as lowered inflammation, reduced red blood cell aggregation. So red blood cell aggregation is when your red blood cells kind of stick together, right? And if they stick together, they can't get through the tiny little microcapillaries to get to the cells like they need to. So things get clogged up. It also improves heart rate variability. So this is the balance between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And it even has a favorable impact on blood viscosity. So this is how liquid your blood is, how viscous it is. If it's too viscous, it's going to have negative impact on your health. So these impacts on red blood cell and blood viscosity in particular have serious benefits for cardiovascular health. And there were even a couple of observational studies done on COVID patients that demonstrated incredible benefits. And I've included a link to the paper in the show notes accompanying this episode. It's totally fascinating. They had people who were very, very sick and were having major respiratory distress, and they attached these electrodes to their chest that were grounded, and in all the people that they grounded, they had better outcomes than the people who weren't grounded. It's mind-blowing how simple some of these things kind of are, right? Now, it reduces stress and improves mood. So this is grounding. Grounding will help to reduce stress and improve mood. When people tell you go hug a tree, they're actually not kidding. This is this whole nature deficit thing. Again, enhances HRV, shifts your body into a parasympathetic state, particularly when you're connecting with the earth. Now, grounding has also been shown to improve sleep quality, right? We were just talking about the glymphatic system up there. Notice when you go on a beach, if you're the type of person that ever goes on a beach holiday or you go camping and you spend a lot more time barefoot, have you ever noticed how much better you feel and how much better you sleep? It has a lot to do with a lot of different factors, but grounding is definitely one of them. Now, if, let's say, you're listening to this and you're like, but Nat, I live on the 20th floor of a building. Like, it is entirely impractical for me to get up in the morning, go down the elevator 20 stories, and then finding a patch of grass in where I live is like a complete nightmare. I hear you. The cool thing is that there's now technology that can help. So there are grounding sheets that you can buy. And I have a grounding sheet on my bed because I sleep on the third floor, and it's definitely better to have a grounding sheet on your bed than not, because as much as you can ground, the better off you are. It wasn't crazy expensive, but it wasn't cheap. It's, you're spending some money, but it's a great hack for improving your sleep and your HRV. And then when you can get your bare feet in the soil, go ahead and do it. It'll do wonders for your health. Reduce your cortisol, reduce inflammation, can reduce pain. That paper that I linked to in the show notes will give you a lot more detail. All right. What's next? Finish eating dinner 3 hours before bed. A lot of people talk about this, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to you. I saw a study recently that kind of shed some doubt on the value of this. I don't know that much about the study, and I know that there's some naysayers out there when it comes to this, but I can tell you that there's at least 3 good reasons why you want to do this. So number one, it's going to impact your sleep quality. If you eat too close to bedtime, what studies have shown is that it increases nighttime awakenings and may drive irregular sleep durations. So what was interesting is one of the studies, and again, it's linked below, one of the studies showed that when people ate less than an hour before bed, they actually slept longer, but they didn't sleep better. They had more disrupted sleep. And disrupted sleep, quite apart from the fact that you're going to be more tired in the morning, also messes up your glymphatic drainage. So remember, I said we were going to be bouncing back between concepts. Disrupted sleep means glymphatic drainage can be altered. So for that reason alone, you want to make sure that you finish eating your meals a good 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. Metabolic health and weight management. And this is, I think, what that study was arguing. They were saying that if people ate the same thing later, that they wouldn't necessarily gain more weight. I don't believe it. I don't buy it. There's too many studies, first of all, that show differently. But here's what late night eating does. It's linked with an increased risk of obesity, impaired glucose tolerance, changes in the wrong direction in fat storage and metabolism. Basically, your body ends up storing more fat. So there was a meta-analysis. So that means this is a big analysis of a bunch of different studies. So 29 randomized clinical trials involving like around 2,400 people. So this is a lot of people, men and women. They demonstrated greater weight loss with time-restricted eating. So again, they were shortening that window when people were feeding during the day, lower meal frequency. So this means probably they were not snacking as much, and eating more of a person's total calories earlier in the day. Now, so when they implemented this over 12 weeks, they all got better results, and it also resulted in better metabolic health. So, there's a lot of arrows pointing in the same direction. Now, a lot of you guys are going to say, but Nat, I intermittent fast. I skip breakfast every day. That gives me a 16 to 18 hour window. That really works for me. And I get that. I know that from a convenience perspective, from a lifestyle perspective, and from a social perspective, it's a heck of a lot easier to skip breakfast than it is to skip dinner. But I'm telling you now, skip breakfast is actually not the meal you want to skip. Time and time again, studies come out showing that people who skip breakfast very often will end up eating more and binging later on in the day to make up for it. Your body is really smart. It knows what it knows. It wants what it wants. So the best meal to skip is dinner. If you can't flat out skip dinner, at least a couple of times a week or 3 times a week, try to eat dinner really early. I have a good friend. I think I've talked about her on podcasts before. Katrine Valinsky. She's the person that I co-host those retreats in Sedona with. And when we're at conferences together, she's dragging me out the door at 4:30 in the afternoon to go eat dinner. When she first started doing this, I'm like, who eats dinner at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? But it turns out that that's a perfect time to eat, because then you have your whole night free. And by the time you go to bed, if you go to bed early, even at 10 or 9, or even at 11, you'll have fully digested your food. Now, the downside for some people, if they're not eating the right foods and they're not eating enough protein and they're not balanced, they may find that they get hungry before bed. So you're going to have to find your balance in here, but definitely whatever you do, 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, you want to stop eating. And this is exceptionally true if you're using GLP-1 agonists, because GLP-1 agonists are going to slow down your digestion. Okay. The other advantage to stopping eating 3 hours before bed is your digestion is going to be better, particularly for people who suffer from heartburn and poor digestion. If you go to bed on a full stomach, you don't sleep as well. And if you suffer from acid reflux, basically heartburn, you're going to get acid reflux, right? And you don't want to be that person that needs to sleep on a tilt because they don't want their acid reflux. Just get to the source of the problem. Just don't eat that late. Next, circadian rhythm alignment. Now, your circadian rhythm is wildly important. Now, notice we talked about circadian earlier when we talked about grounding. Grounding supports proper circadian rhythm alignment. Well, meal timing also impacts circadian rhythm. Know that when we're traveling across time zones, a lot of us biohacking types, as soon as we land in the new time zone, we will get our feet in the ground, eyes on the sun, so that we can start to realign our circadian rhythm to the place that we're at. The other thing you want to do is now start to adopt meal timing as if you're in the new place. It's a great way to deal with jet lag. Maintaining that circadian rhythm is huge in your overall health, weight management, and metabolism. All right. Our last one here. This is the one that my girlfriend called me about, saying, but Nat, what if you can't? So the 5th tip was breathe through your nose. Practice nasal breathing when you're sleeping. Consider mouth taping. Now, here's the bad news. If you can't breathe through your nose, if your nose is congested or you have a deviated septum, taping your mouth shut is probably a really bad idea, because it's going to lead to a lot of the biggest problems that we get from mouth breathing. And I'm going to talk about those in a minute. So it goes without saying that if you close your mouth and you can't breathe properly through your nose, you're going to want to get checked out and find out why that is. A lot of people, because they snore and they mouth breathe, they'll go for a sleep study and they'll be given a CPAP. The CPAP, it's kind of a solution, but what it's doing, it's solving a symptom. It's not really solving the cause. And there are a lot of interesting tools and practices out there right now that can help people address the cause of that mouth breathing, retrain the nasal breathing so that they don't ever need a CPAP in the first place. I'm going to tell you why you want to correct for that mouth breathing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ways or some of the people you can consult to address the problem. Okay, so here are a few of the reasons why when you're sleeping, you want to breathe through your nose. And then we're going to go into a little bit more detail. Number 1, it reduces sleep disorders. Number 2, your nose filters and humidifies the air. This is also true when you're exercising. When you're sleeping, it promotes oral and dental health. Sleeping with your mouth open causes dehydration of the oral mucosa, and it opens the door to all kinds of bacteria and infections. So 100% for oral and dental health, you want to keep your mouth shut. It lowers blood pressure and increases nitric oxide production. Those two kind of go together. Also improves mental focus. And finally, There is an association between mouth breathing and developing neurodegenerative diseases. Yikes. That's nasty, right? So here's how that happens. Mouth breathing can lead to OSA. So that's obstructive sleep apnea. And that leads to intermittent hypoxia. Hypoxia is when you're deprived of oxygen. And this is because of the airway can collapse during sleep over and over again. And ultimately what this drives is sleep fragmentation. Going back to our glymphatic system, remember, not improper sleep is going to impact the ability of your glymphatic system to function. So right away, we have a problem. Now that chronic hypoxia triggers neuroinflammation, oxidative stress, and neuronal apoptosis. Neuronal means brain cells, like your brain neurons. Apoptosis is death. So basically the dying of your brain cells. All bad. And all of these things are implicated in Alzheimer's and other dementia. Hypoxia also specifically damages the white matter of the brain, which affects the connectivity in the brain, as well as reducing gray matter in memory-related regions, such as the hippocampus. So the hippocampus of the brain is related to memory, and it specifically could suffer due to that hypoxia. In addition, mouth breathing alters prefrontal cortex oxygenation. So this is your executive function, potentially negatively impacting cognitive function and memory. Finally, OSA, which is obstructive sleep apnea, actually increases the plasma levels of amyloid plaque and tau proteins, both of which are biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease. So hopefully I've convinced you now that mouth breathing is something that you really want to take seriously and you want to address. I don't want to sit here and stress you out by just giving you the problem and no solutions. So the first thing you can try is, if you know that your nose is clear and you can easily breathe through your nose during the day, and you can easily breathe through your nose when you're going to bed at night, you might want to try mouth taping. And when we talk about mouth taping, we're not saying take a giant piece of duct tape and glue your mouth shut so you couldn't possibly open it. You can buy really inexpensive mouth tape on Amazon these days. It's got a little tiny hole in the middle. It's really mostly there's like the X, there's the lips, there's a bunch of different kinds. But what it's going to do is it's going to retrain you to keep your mouth closed and to breathe through your nose, if that's possible. If your nose is it's not blocked, but you're feeling like it's not as open, guess what? Those breathe right strips, those little nasal strips that football players and athletes use so that they breathe better, definitely put a breathe right strip on your nose. Give it a try. There's also these new ones, these magnetic ones that are crazy. So my husband and my son use them. Sorry, son. My son doesn't love it when I talk about him on the podcast, and my husband's somewhat resigned. Anyway, what it is you've got two little stickers, one that goes on each side of your nose that has a little magnet in it. And then there's like a magnetic half circle that you put on the outside of the nose, and those magnets attract each other. And what it does is it opens up the nasal passage. It's really cool. So you could put some mouth tape on and put on one of those breathe right strips or that nasal strip, and it could make all the difference in the world to you. Now, if that still doesn't work, it could be that there's a deeper problem, right? It could be that it's your tongue. As we age, our tongue, it starts to fall back into the throat, or the palate starts to get lax, or it could have to do with the tongue tie. This is underneath the tongue. That tissue might be tying down the tongue too much, pulling it back into the airway. You could have a deviated septum. So what you want to do is find a physician. Very often these are holistic dentists. These dentists are very much about the airway. And so what they'll do is a 360-degree cone scan of your head and neck. And that will give them information as to where the problem is. So the problem could be in the nose. If you have a deviated septum, that can be corrected. The problem could be in the mouth. Sometimes we need to expand the palate, which is unpleasant, but it's done gradually with these palate expanders. My good friend, Molly Eastman, who hosts the podcast Sleep is a Skill, she's a total expert in this area. So I'm sure she's got lots of resources for you. She's taught me a lot about this. I also have a podcast coming up with Dr. Michael Bruce, the sleep doctor. He's got some great resources on his website as well. But I wanted to make sure I gave you some stuff here so that you could at least have a starting point. So there's a laser that can be done on the soft palate that helps to tighten that up. So the challenge with that one is you have to repeat it every year. But if that's the solution to your problem, it certainly beats a CPAP machine, right? Oh, there's a TENS machine, I think, for the palate again, and or for the tongue. Molly was telling me about this. Anyway, there's a ton of different solutions to this problem. The point is to identify it. And like I said at the beginning of the podcast, you guys, these are not just things we want to be thinking about in our 40s and our 50s. These are things we want to be thinking about when we're young. We even like for university students, high school students, even little kids. If you have a small child who's continually congested nasally and is breathing with their mouth open, I mean, I've heard little kids who snore as loud as adults. It's not cute. It's really unhealthy for them. So we need to be able to make sure that we're trying to solve for these issues as early in the game as possible, because it's a heck of a lot easier to retrain mouth breathing in a little kid than it is in someone who's 60 years old who's been doing it their whole lives, right? So going back to our list, take digestive bitters before your meals to support proper digestion. We're going to want to support the glymphatic system to support the brain's ability to release toxins from the day. We're going to want to practice nasal breathing, both when we're sleeping, when we're exercising, and frankly, when we're walking around during the day. We're going to finish dinner 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed, and grounding. Get out into nature, get your feet in the soil. And if you really can't, if you're completely shut off from nature, get yourself a grounding sheet. All right. That's it for today. Let me know what you think. I've linked a bunch of different studies in the show notes for you guys, for those of you who want to dig a little deeper into these things. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think if you want more of this, or if you want me to go deeper and deeper into the really nerdy science. But I figured I would keep this one as practical as possible for you. I wanted to give you guys these 5 critically important tools to help you to age more slowly, feel better today, and just be a happier, healthier human being. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you again soon.